Good morning. I would like us to go back and reflect a little bit on the book of Daniel and the type of prophecies that we actually find there. And I've categorized them into two kinds. And the first one I want to draw your attention to is the time prophecies found in the book of Daniel. And there are only two that are bound in time. First of all, Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 tells me that there is a time period of 2,300 years that the sanctuary was going to be trampled on. Then I find out in Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 through to 27 that there was another period of time given to us, and that was the 490 years, and it was what we will call the Jewish dispensation. Now in verse 25 of Daniel chapter 9 we were told that at a beginning point for the 490 years, and that was the decree to rebuild the walls and the sanctuary. And we found that to be in 457 BCE. So we had a starting point for this Jewish dispensation. And so if we take the 490 years from 457 BCE, we find that this period of time of the Jewish dispensation ended in 34 CE. So you can't take this period of time and move it forward or backwards. It can only happen in this particular period of time. So it is bound in time. But we also found out that the Jewish dispensation was cut out of the 2,300 year period. So we also have a starting point for the 2,300 years, because it's the same starting point of the Jewish dispensation, and that is 457 BCE. So if we take 457 BCE and we take the 2,300, we are brought to 1844. So particular things happened and they were bound in time. You can't move them around. So, for example, Christ warned us that in the future there was going to be messiahs that would come. We know that they are false because they don't fit into this particular period of time. They might have some of the characteristics, but they don't. They are here, and if they're here, they can't be right because the Messiah came at a particular point in time. So time prophecies are very important because they help us to understand that we are bound in time. Certain events took place in a particular time period. And we are going to see later on that something happened in 1844 that our attention will be drawn to. But to understand the second kind of prophecies that you find in the book of Daniel and are also applicable in the book of Revelation is what we call Cinderella prophecies. Now Cinderella prophecies I want to use to explain this, Matthew chapter 2. Now in Matthew chapter 2 we have the story of the Magi, the wise men, who came to Herod and wanted to see the king that had been born in Jerusalem. It's interesting that nobody knows about this, but so he calls in the priests, and the priests tell him that the Christ was to be born in Bethlehem. So we have a characteristic of where the Christ was to be born, and that is in Bethlehem, according to the prophecies of Isaiah. So we see here that the priests tell him that this king would be born in Bethlehem, out of the tribe of Judah, out of the house of David. And we find that we have Cinderella prophecies. We have the Bethlehem, we have out of the city of David, and we have out of the family or the root of Jesse. So those are Cinderella prophecies. Now why we need to understand this is that Herod tells him that Jesus, the King of the Jews, was born in Bethlehem. They go off to Bethlehem and they find it exactly as the prophecy said, as the Cinderella prophecy was. Jesus was in a manger, and Mary and Joseph are the parents there. But then I want you to notice that Herod asked the wise men to come back to him because he also wanted to go and worship this new king. But the interesting thing is that he actually wanted to kill Jesus. But after a 2-year period, he realized that the wise men weren't going to come back because they had been instructed in a dream not to return back to Herod, but to go straight home. Herod senses this, and it says there in verse 16 of chapter 2, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. So I want you to notice here that although Jesus was a male child, and although he was born in Bethlehem, it was 2 years later that Herod realized that the Magi weren't coming back. So because he couldn't identify anything more about that, he had all the boys in Bethlehem and in the vicinity that were 2 years and younger killed. So they could have, those young boys, fulfilled certain prophecies. They fulfilled, for example, that they were males. And secondly, they fulfilled that they were born in Bethlehem. So you can take a Cinderella prophecy and you can apply it to certain things, and it can be found to be fulfilled in them. But when it comes to time prophecies, they can't be moved around. They are bound in time. Why I wanted to draw this to your attention was that in trying to discover the little horn, and we look at the time period of the 1,260 years, the only reason why we can determine that this time period was the beginning of the 1,260 was 538 CE was because certain events take place which fulfill exactly what this little horn was going to do. And that we know by the Cinderella prophecies. But I also want you to know that some of these characteristics were already found, as we saw, in Lucifer. And they will again be repeated in the future by other leaders. So the Cinderella prophecy can be used in the past, the present, and the future to determine certain things. Whereas time prophecy is bound in time. Is that clear? I want you to notice, it's very important to see that when we are trying to understand Daniel, when we look at the Cinderella prophecies, they can be used again and again and again. But when it comes to the time prophecies, they are bound in time. These two periods of time cannot be moved forward or backward, but only take place as Scripture says.